Hello and welcome back. In this video I'll be continuing with the Vietnam diorama build. We'll be looking at making vegetation, painting vegetation, preparing some of the additional models for the diorama, and moving to the next stage of the build. Here we go. In the last video we looked at the groundwork. I decided to fill in the track channels that I'd made using Apoxie Sculpt. If you want to know what Apoxie Sculpt is, check out the last video. I put some of the plastic tracks that come with the kit into the Apoxie Sculpt in order to sculpt some track impressions. And you can see those here in these images. I had a little bit of an assistant here who was disturbing me. Don't ruin my shots, please. Otherwise I continued to blend the Apoxie Sculpt into the edges of the grass mats. Next came some detail painting of stones and so on. This was done with various references from the Life Colour stone set. The various pebbles were picked out and painted in different colours. Next, the reality and scale resin tree trunks were sprayed. Just drying off the paint here with a new tool which we'll explore in a new video, the air blower. Using stony dark brown textured earth from Wilder, the track channels were painted in the same dark muddy colour used elsewhere on the model. And here you can see the reality and scale tree trunks. From the same manufacturer, various jungle plant sets were used, and they come with resin parts, metal parts, and these innovatively produced leaves that come on a sticky backing. And it's a case of removing them with a razor blade. What you then do is you put a little bit of super glue on the metal stems and very carefully apply them to the centre of each leaf. You can see that here. You then bend the stems as appropriate. Also in the sets were these palm leaves, and it's the same process for gluing and attaching the metal stems. You drill into the resin trunks and then glue in the leaves. And here you can see them unpainted as I try out different positions on the diorama. In order to paint them, I tested with AK Interactive's Real Colours NATO Green just to see how they'd look, and then proceeded to do a bit more work on the bigger plants. And that involved just blending in the stems using some Aves Apoxie Sculpt. That just made it appear a bit more realistic. And you can see that in these detail shots of what was created. Now, in order to make the mud channels look a bit more realistic, in theory there would have been grass there, the same as the surrounding areas. So in order to show that, I used some static grass that was soaked in green paint. The water was sucked out and then it was just brushed onto the mud tracks to show kind of compressed, slightly moist, muddy terrain that had been squashed by the ACAV. This is an area I'll probably go over again and spray, but for now everything was fixed with scatter glue, and you can see the kind of effect there. It doesn't look like a strange mud track, it looks more natural. On with the painting. Ammo by MIG primers were used just to block out the colours on the vegetation. You can see I started off with the trunks in a brown colour. This was Trax primer. Just make sure you get a good covering over everything, and then Russian green was used just to spray all the leaves. This is more of a base coat, and you'll see later on that additional colours are used, particularly lighter colours. They're quite tricky to paint because they sort of move with the air. And here you can see just a broad mixture of colours, mainly greens from Tamiya. The idea there was that each plant had a different tonality or different variety of colour. Then a yellow was added to create the highlight colours, and those were gently brushed over the leaves, particularly at the tips and around the edges, just to create a bit of variation in the colours on the leaves. What you want to do is try and get sort of highlighting really where they bend and around the edges. Here we are, just changing this small plant a bit and adding a bit more NATO green. Here I am testing the fitment of these. What you do is you pierce a hole and then drop the stem in. And here you get an idea of what it will look like. Again, these placements are just loose, and of course everything can be moved anyway. It's quite easy just to pull them out and move them, because of course there's foam board underneath, so it's quite easy to pierce it and then just drop them in. And we're ready for the next stage. Here are all the figures that were created, and they get a base coat in AK Interactive Black Surface Primer. Just make sure you get a good covering on everything. And this is just sprayed on with the Harder & Steenbeck Evolution Silverline. You can see what it looks like here, and of course all the other elements of the diorama may as well get a coat as well. So for the cows that tow the cart, this was just concentrated on the lower areas, and that will create a shadow effect later on. Whilst the cart just got a covering all over in the black primer. It sprays really nicely, this primer, and I'd recommend it. Okay, some of the logs that go in the cart were already painted using various acrylics, and then this is the Life Colour Grime and Stain set. Grime Effect Easy 3 set comes with 3 colours, and you get sort of mould and green vegetation mould as well, and that's a really nice colour range, and those were painted to the logs. They were also applied to the plants, and then some of the plant leaves were picked out around the edges by brush to add a bit of variety. To make them more shiny and glossy, some of the plant leaves were picked out with a bit of Tamiya Clear Green as well. Then a bit of dry brushing just to bring out the details of the trunks, as you can see here. And then I proceeded with the sort of pierce and place method, test fitting various placements of all the vegetation. When I was happy, I glued them with a water-based PVA style glue called Speed Bond. You've seen it before, it's really effective, and of course it can always be undone. This is medium flesh, and it's the colour I used to paint one of the cows. This is sprayed with Vallejo model colour, and model colour sprays really well. You just need to apply thinner, and then it sprays perfectly fine. This is Life Colour, it's one of their grey shades, and that was used to paint the other cow for a bit of variety. You can see the effect of the black primer shining through there. Everything was toned down with a bit of white, or off-white. I think this is incinerated white. These aren't finished yet, but they're ready for the next stage. For the cart, this was first sprayed in a brown colour, burnt umber, this time from Vallejo model colour, and that was just loosely applied over, allowing the black primer to shine through. You can see me just going over the whole model there. The effect I wanted was sort of white wood, but not something different to the wood that would go in the actual cart, so it needed to be a bit browner. Then I reached for the Life Colour wood set, which is a great set, and just worked my way through it. This is the wood warm base colour, thinned about 70-30 with their own brand thinners. And just sprayed kind of in the centre of panels to create a highlight. I then zapped it with the hairdryer to speed things up. That's the advantage of acrylics, is they're very quick to work with. That's why I like them so much. Then I proceed down to the next stage in the paint set. It's very simple. I just hit the highlight areas towards the top of the cart, or where the driver would sit, for example. Just work gently and keep the pressure low on the airbrush, and it's very easy to apply these central highlights. You can see the effect on the wheel, for example, is quite convincing. Finally, the last colour, which is almost a white. It's called Wood Cold Light Shade. And that's just used on the very top runners and the very highest areas of the model. For the wheels, on the other hand, the centre of the hub is sprayed, and there you get the overall effect. I just test fitted them on the model, and as you can see, an easy way to handle the cart was to put it on a piece of polystyrene. So there's the cart and the wood load and the cows. In order to get them ready for the next stage, they were just sprayed in a coat of Johnson's Clear. Here's the diorama with the vegetation in place. Me test fitting the cart to see where it will go and how all the colours work with the diorama. And there are the cows, ready for the next stage, and you can see the load of wood in the cart, and that's what I wanted, a contrast between the load and the cart itself. The cows meanwhile are sort of blocked out in colour, and they'll be painted later. Time now for a dark wash. This is a very classic model technique. First you get a load of thinners, and you just make sure the model is wet and moist all over. And then this is MIG dark wash. It's been around for ages. It's thinned with thinners, and then what you do is you just very gently put the shadow wash all over the model. And the dark wash settles in all the details and crevices and creates a really nice shadow effect. This is of course an enamel product, so it can be reworked and adjusted later with more thinners. Just liberally apply it. This is not a pin wash, this is just a general wash. You just need to bear in mind that it will of course darken the whole paint effect. Then what you can do is remove the excess using a wide flat brush with a bit of thinners. And then you can remove any excess on the surface, and then what you should get is the dark shadow wash remains in all the darkest areas. And there you can see the effect. For the cows, the next stage was a bit of detail painting. You can see using Life Colours black set that I'd started to paint all the little features and had begun some of the highlighting on the cows. Which brings us to the last stage for this video, but we're now moving on to the final touches on the vehicle itself. The kit comes with excellent single piece tracks in plastic, but of course you have to set them up, so I just created a simple jig using double-sided sticky tape. What that does is it just holds down the tracks whilst you glue them and you assemble them. Very simple and very effective. Here are some detailed shots. Our next video will almost certainly be a dedicated tutorial on painting 1/35 scale figures, and I'll be updating our video on painting figures' faces. It won't necessarily be in this series, but the next video in this series will be the completion of the whole diorama. In the meantime, hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and bye.
Subscribe for our latest videos.